today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Community Rating System program, as well as the connection between the CRS program and comprehensive planning efforts. And I appreciate the question that's already come in about the CRS program and administrative capacity and administrative costs, and I will answer that question as I go through the presentation. So it's nice to see that there are some names that I'm familiar with from some previous outreach efforts related to the CRS program. And so some of the kind of CRS overview will hopefully be a nice refresher for those people with whom I've had the pleasure to talk about the CRS in the past. All right, so I work for Wetlands Watch. We're a nonprofit based in Norfolk, Virginia, working statewide on the preservation and protection of tidal wetlands. We do a lot of this work through floodplain management, working within the National Flood Insurance Program because local land use decisions along the shoreline are directly impacted by the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program. And working a lot in sea level rise adaptation and planning because our greatest threat to tidal wetlands is not really one-off development, but is in fact sea level rise and rising waters. All right, so why do we care about the community rating system? And I'm going to tell you what the community rating system is, but basically it's an insurance program, right? So it's operating within the National Flood Insurance Program. Why does a conservation group care about this? The CRS program is one of the only ways that we have seen available to monetize ecosystem services and natural functions and natural infrastructure in our highest flood risk areas. And in Virginia, where we have no elevation to speak of, all of our areas of tidal species really do happen along the shoreline because our elevation is so low. So the things that the CRS gives the most points for, and we're going to talk about those points, are keeping development out of those high flood risk areas, and those high risk flood risk areas, again, are along the shorelines, and then removing structures out of the way. So there's been great discourse already about the big bad R word or retreat, coastal reinvestment, coastal relocation, we can call it whatever we want to, but their impact is still the same, getting people out of harm's way. That's the goal. And what happens after people are out of harm's way is open space. And what we do with the open space after structures have been removed is of particular interest to Wetlands Watch because as more risks happen, more buyouts will also happen, and what we do with the landscape after the fact is in question. And what people are doing on the Middle Peninsula with the Public Access Authority is right on the money, and we just are so grateful that they have that program that we can all learn from. All right, so what is the CRS program? What is this acronym that everyone keeps referring to? The Community Rating System is a part of the National Flood Insurance Program. The National Flood Insurance Program is a voluntary program that local governments decide to join. And when they decide to join, they have to do specific things that FEMA says they have to do, which basically means they have to regulate development in those high flood risk areas. So FEMA gives the communities a map, and the map shows where the flood risk is in the community. And then they have to do specific things and require specific things within those zones. In exchange for that, the federal government says, okay, community, that means that you get to have National Flood Insurance Program coverage in the community, which opens you up to all sorts of opportunities in addition to that flood insurance coverage, which includes disaster assistance during big storm events, as well as grant assistance to do all the things that we've been talking about, elevating homes, buying properties out, et cetera. So that's what the National Flood Insurance Program is. And when you're in the community, in the National Flood Insurance Program, local governments are eligible to join the CRS program. The CRS program is offering discounts on flood insurance premiums annually for policyholders in the community. And the local governments are actually earning these points and these discounts on flood insurance premiums for actions that the community is taking to reduce flood risk in the community, and that are going above and beyond those minimum requirements that the National Flood Insurance Program says you have to meet. So going above and beyond, adopting those higher standards is the name of the game. The actions that a community is earning credits for are those that are typically administered by the local government. And there are other ways to get credit for actions that are happening and that are being done outside of the local government staff, but it's primarily for those local government functions. And the local government's in charge of administrating the program, so a staff person in a community is actually what's called the CRS coordinator. So why is this program in existence? The more a community does to protect against flood risk, the less of a drain that community will be on the National Flood Insurance Program's insurance pool, right? So this is an insurance program. It's good to keep that in mind. So they want to make sure that the pool is better protected so they don't lose as much money. The other thing that's really cool, and one of the reasons why we really like the CRS program, is that it's encouraging a comprehensive approach to floodplain management. There are lots of different things that earn credits, and lots of different people in a community, depending on how big your community is, are responsible for implementing all of those things. So it brings departments together into a conversation about flood risk that may not have otherwise happened, again, if you're in a big community where departments have different offices across the like the city limits, for example. So this comprehensive approach is just good news for everybody. How does this work? How do the points work? So I said that you're earning points for activities that a local government is doing to reduce flood risk. And those points that you're earning are giving you different class ratings. So one is the highest class that a community can earn, and you can see how many points it takes to get there. And the discounts that's earned, that's possible, the highest percentage off that a community can earn is 45%. So everybody starts here at 9 and you earn 500 points to get to a class 9. And every 500 points that you earn going into the program, you jump up one class. Each class that's earned has a 5% incremental increase of a discount. So again, this is annual discounts right on your community members, whether it's a resident or a business, their flood insurance bill. It comes every year. They see the discount and it just comes right off of the rate. So it's a really, really wonderful opportunity for residents to afford flood insurance that may otherwise be not affordable. And of course, we've seen flood insurance increases because of congressional reforms time and time again. And these changes keep on happening. Risk Rating 2.0 is the newest iteration of the National Flood Insurance Program, changing the way that it does things. And this Risk Rating 2.0 is kind of emergent and new, and I can send a link in the chat that links to a page where we have an overview of the changes and what it means. But the good news is for Risk Rating 2.0, it now means that all policyholders in a community are eligible to receive the discount. It used to be that preferred risk policies, and basically this just means people who aren't required to have flood insurance but decide to have it anyway, which is a really good idea if you live in coastal Virginia and you have some flood risk. Everybody should carry flood insurance. But before Risk Rating 2.0, this new change that's coming into effect in October 1st, and then a phased effect in April 2022, which is when most people will see the impacts. Those policyholders that didn't have to have flood insurance, they weren't getting this sweet discount from the community rating system involvement at the local level. So we're really excited as CRS program nerds that this is a new result of Risk Rating 2.0. And for all of the communities that have heard about the CRS program, but have heard that, it's a program that communities are involved in, but the premium discounts aren't available to everybody in the community, this solves that problem, right? That kind of optics issue of the CRS program. Everybody's going to get these discounts. And as someone who has one of those elective policies, I'm particularly excited about this because I worked so hard to champion the CRS program and wasn't even getting the benefits. So it's pretty sweet to be able to see that discount on my flood insurance bill. So good news coming out of Risk Rating 2.0. If anybody has questions about that, we can talk about it later. As I mentioned, communities are earning credits for activities and actions that are happening within those highest risk flood zones. And there's this acronym that could come up and you might have heard of, which is SFHA. That stands for Special Flood Hazard Areas. And really, it just means the zones of highest flood risk where a property owner is required to have flood insurance if they have a federally backed mortgage. On this map, this just shows what a flood map looks like over land. Those areas of highest flood risk are in blue or aqua, and then the areas of less flood risk, but still risk, are in orange, and then the opaque no color. So we're talking about things that happen in these highest risk areas because that's where the property owners have to have flood insurance premiums and policies, and that's where the CRS cares about protecting its insurance pool. So what types of things earn credits? Activities are kind of broken out by these 4 buckets: public information, mapping and regulations, flood damage reduction, and warning and response. And so all the things that we've been talking about in this comprehensive planning workshop are just so integral and kind of involved in all of the different activities. So as I mentioned, one of the goals of the CRS program is to create a comprehensive approach to floodplain management. And it should be no surprise that conversations about comprehensive planning will have such an intersection across all of these different activities. So you get points for doing things like making your flood risk available on a GIS, like the map in the previous slide, educating the public, which is something that Elizabeth has spoken quite a lot about in this workshop for good reason. You want to engage the public about where they live and what their risks are. Mapping and regulations. This is a really interesting activity, and it has probably the bulk of the points, but basically, what actions, what ordinances, what type of regulatory actions is a community taking to reduce flood risk in those areas of highest flood risk? So open space, keeping our flood zones, our high risk flood zones free of development through low density zoning, through enforcement of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act buffers, which we'll talk about. That's included in this section, as are building code standards. So requiring that new and substantially improved structures are built a specific number of feet above that kind of baseline of flooding that the flood maps indicate. It's an elevation on a map. Requiring that those structures be built higher to protect against flood losses earns a ton of points in the community rating system. The third category, flood damage reduction, this is where our comprehensive planning, the floodplain management planning comes into play. So actions that a community is taking to plan for and to implement flood risk reduction, buyouts, elevating structures, maintaining drainage, stormwater management. These are the types of things that earn credits in this activity. The last activity is warning and response. How are you preparing your community for a flood event, whether that's hurricane risk or tidal inundation, or in Norfolk, lunar high tides or high tides with a little bit of wind? How are you telling people, hey, y'all should move your cars, or hey, school bus, please don't drive on that road that y'all drive on, and the flood damages the school buses? These types of things earn credits in that activities. Wanted to provide a little bit of background about how the CRS is going in Virginia. We have 27 communities that are participating, which is a 9% participation rate, and we're saving over $7 million. So we're doing great. The national participation rate is 6%, so we're above national average, which is excellent. And as I mentioned, with this whole Risk Rating 2.0 rollout, in addition to all of the policyholders in an entire community being eligible for the CRS discounts, the rates are changing, and the rating technique is specifically changing for everybody's flood insurance premiums across the country. And there are certain rating factors that will make coastal communities like those in Virginia particularly interested in the CRS program, because the rating approach is intended to make the National Flood Insurance Program more solvent, because it's super bankrupt. And so we can anticipate that more communities will get pressure from policyholders in their community to join the CRS program to help alleviate some of those financial burdens of the new risk rating. One of the reasons why the rating is becoming a little bit more complicated for coastal communities is they're including a distance to a flood risk source or a flood source. So distance to an ocean, a river, or a coastal water body is now a big factor in your rate. And if you live in coastal Virginia, like we all do, the distance of the 50 miles, which is what the rating is based on, definitely means that we're all going to experience some sort of coastal, I'm calling it a coastal surcharge because we don't know quite what it's going to be because the rating tables haven't been released yet. But I digress. I think that we'll see increased interest in the CRS program, which I'm excited about. This is what our participation looks like. Blue is participating, as is the green dots. And so you'll see, you know, in the areas where we're kind of talking about in the RAFT communities on this call, there is an opportunity for more participation. A lot of communities not participating. Let's talk about comprehensive planning and how communities can earn CRS credits for comp plans. So the area where a lot of communities across the country are earning credits for comprehensive planning applies somewhat to Virginia communities, and particularly our coastal communities. Floodplain management planning is the activity where communities would earn points for overall kind of overarching strategies to reduce the impacts of flooding in a coastal community. But right now, in the majority of communities in Virginia and in our region are earning this credit for hazard mitigation plans. The Hampton Roads Hazard Mitigation Plan earns 300 points, so almost the full level of points, and has been featured nationally as a really strong plan for CRS credit earning purposes. And so, interestingly, that you know, this is where communities are really earning these points. I'm glad that Brian is on this call because the city of Portsmouth released its own floodplain management plan. There aren't a ton of communities that have done this. A lot of communities are using that hazard mitigation plan to do flood risk management, but the city of Portsmouth released their own, and it was 254 points, and it was released prior to the Hampton Roads hazard mitigation plan, and was also touted kind of nationally as a really strong example of a CRS credit earning plan under this activity. So there's some great examples for us to look from, but I just wanted to note that, you know, a lot of our hazard mitigation planning efforts in the state are trying to align with the CRS program. And so there's like a big effort to get those hazard mitigation plans to earn as many CRS points as possible. And those hazard mitigation plans are typically written by consultants, and those consultants are trying from the very beginning to make sure they're meeting all the steps that you can see here on the screen. So a lot of communities aren't getting specific credit in the activity that's probably most related to the comprehensive planning and the CRS program. So I'm going to talk more about, you know, how comprehensive plans can incorporate elements to earn CRS credits in addition to the credits that would be eligible under the hazard mitigation plan. So I hope that makes sense and people are still with me here. But basically, we're just going to talk about a kitchen sink, which I misspelled on this slide, a kitchen sink approach. How do we just like basically layer on as many possible credit earning activities in a comprehensive plan to help a community position itself best to earn as many points as possible? Because if you have one initiative going with the CRS program, it's best to kind of tag team on it so you're not reinventing another plan or another program. You want to kind of utilize and try to save as much time as possible with the CRS program, which is very documentation intensive, and it'll get to the question that was asked earlier in the chat. So you can incorporate small planning efforts or small plans into your comp plan, whether this is through an addendum, an actual attachment, or whatever. You can do that. And there are lots of different plans and activities available in the CRS program. The Natural Floodplain Functions Plan is a really good example of how to insert language and resources like tool maps and things into a comprehensive plan to earn more credits. A great example is the Natural Floodplain Functions Plan, the Green Infrastructure Plan for the City of Norfolk, which was awarded 100 points. So that's the full amount of points that it could have earned. And this is a addendum to the comp plan. So it's a part of the comp plan as approved by the City Council. Other things that you can do is to provide information about threatened or endangered species within your comprehensive plan. And you can see that Gloucester has done this, and this highlighted language is what someone would do, a CRS coordinator would actually do for the purpose of earning credits. So they would highlight it and then they would reference the number and the activity that the CRS points could come from. And so it's just an example of, listing what kind of species are located in your community that are at risk, and then kind of addressing a particular strategy for protecting those species is something that earns points. This is an example of Gloucester County's species assessment and species plan that they created. And it's like an 8-page document. It's not a huge document, and it literally can just be attached to your comprehensive plan. You can do a repetitive loss area analysis within your comprehensive plan, which is basically just an identification of the areas of highest flood claims, and then some sort of analysis for how you plan on dealing with it. Like, we're going to elevate in this repetitive loss area. We're going to buy out in this repetitive loss area. You can kind of link the plans together, and you can see on the slide that Portsmouth did this with their floodplain management plan. And then the City of Norfolk did this with their public information about flood insurance plan that they created. Again, all being incorporated into the comprehensive planning process. This is an example of the City of Portsmouth's floodplain management plan that they received all those points for, kind of in lieu of the hazard mitigation planning points. And you can see that they've mapped out areas of repetitive loss, and the red is severe repetitive loss, so the most at risk, most claims filed. And they have accompanying plan policies for how they plan to address those flood risks in the future. This is screenshots of the Norfolk plan. So this, you can see, is an assessment of where all of their flood insurance policies are in the city. And then the kind of marked out boxed areas are all areas of repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss. You get a lot of points, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, for protecting open spaces within the high-risk flood zone. So basically, the fewer structures that are in the high-risk flood zone, the safer your community is, the more points you earn, and the less of a drain on the National Flood Insurance Program risk pool. So you get credit for keeping development out of these areas. So how can you do this? How can you kind of like build the case for your open space points in your comprehensive plan? Include language about locality owned and operated parks being development free. Include language about the importance of keeping development out of RPA buffers and tidal wetlands areas. These are just some examples of Gloucester's comprehensive plan and how it includes information about their parks and recreational spaces. The more maps you have about places of open space and areas where you could get CRS credit in all your plans, the better documentation will go and the easier it will be to submit stuff for credit in the CRS program. References and tables to the actual maps is awesome, and it makes it really easy for someone who's, again, marking up your documents for the purpose of receiving CRS points. And I've just included some examples here. Description of what happens in your parks, like, is it used for recreation? Is it completely reserve land, or is there recreation and boat access and things like that? References to the intention of parks and areas is really important to help build the case for your CRS points. Information about how green corridors and open space corridors for the purpose of kind of connectivity of open lands is really important for the CRS program, and something that they care a lot about, and can be worth quite a lot of points. If you have heard nothing and learned nothing from this presentation, just the takeaway is, if you insert a sentence into your comp plan, you can earn 10 points. There's like this one magic sentence that if you add it, then you get 10 points. And 10 points isn't a lot, but all these points really add up. And if it's something as easy as writing one sentence and getting it in, then definitely do it. And it's basically just the land use plan, or this would be the comprehensive plan, recommending that open space be used as a way to reduce flood risk in a community. So that's a really easy one. I talked about CRS buffer, or CRS credits for the resource protection area 100-foot buffers and title features as well. This is just a couple kind of snapshots of maps and language within a comprehensive plan. And this is actually a natural resource plan that shows the importance of and the existence of the RPA buffers. And so including information about how important these areas are and what the community is doing to protect them is really, really helpful. So again, just as much language as you can. I'm just going to wrap up with a couple additional things. There's a new kind of credit for high erosion rates. And this again can be done, the credit can be achieved through the incorporation of a map in your comprehensive plan that shows these areas of 1.5 feet or more of annual erosion. And then you would just adopt an ordinance that kind of references the area and says, we're really trying to keep development out of here. Conservation zoning and kind of zoning and that basically is low density is really, really is another thing that the CRS program awards a lot of credits for. And so if you have a map that shows all of your character zoning areas and what those zoning areas actually mean in terms of what they limit, how large their acres need to be for one development, right? Things like that. Having maps like that included in your comprehensive plan is so helpful for documentation purposes. We're talking about resilient sea level rise. Basically the CRS program is trying to figure out how they want to credit sea level rise, but basically what everybody should know is that accounting for on a map the 2100 projection using an intermediate high scenario from the climate assessment curve is the way to do it. As many maps as possible, as much information about public outreach and information to people is going to really help you in terms of making that comprehensive plan work for the CRS program. Just going to highlight this, not going to talk about it, but the Community Flood Preparedness Fund is available. It's a lot of money that's coming into our communities. If you can make your comprehensive plan match the plan requirements for the local resilience fund plan, then you definitely should. And that's all I have to say about that.